Boa noite, good evening. Eu vou falar em inglês, I'm going to speak in English. On behalf of the Brazil Initiative, I would like to welcome you to the 7th International Conference on Brazil at Brown University, entitled Challenges to Brazilian Democracy. My name is James Green. I'm the director of the Brazil Initiative, a member of the departments of History and Portuguese and Brazilian Studies at Brown University. And along with Ramon Stern, I'm one of the two organizers of this event tonight. The focus of the next 3 days is the election of Jair Bolsonaro to the presidency and its effects on democracy in Brazil. We are particularly concerned about his new policies and their effects on Afro-Brazilians and indigenous populations, the rights of rural workers and peasants, the significant gains of LGBTQI women, human rights in general, the environment, academic freedom, and the progressive social economic changes that have taken place in recent years. However, we must first remember that his electoral victory was part of a much larger and broader international movement of the far right that has assumed power through electoral means in countries throughout the world, from Russia, Turkey, and the Philippines to Hungary, Poland, Israel, and the United States. Using the legitimacy of elections and the weapons of fake news, the far-right governments have consolidated power and then, through legislation and lawfare, have begun to chip away at democratic and social rights. Brazil is now a significant part of that international wave, and for this reason, Bolsonaro has become legible to observers here in the United States who generally know very little about Brazilian politics. It is also one of the reasons that journalists have coined and the media has quickly adopted the phrase that Bolsonaro is the Trump of the tropics. And I like to remind people in this country that he's 10 times worse. Or perhaps we might think of Trump as the Bolsonaro of the North, and just as bad. It is therefore no accident that on December 1st, 2018, over 200 academics and Brazilian activists, and that sometimes is an overlapping category, came together at the Columbia Law School for a day-long gathering entitled the National Meeting for Democracy in Brazil. I'm going to let some people get into the room. There's seats over here, a couple of seats over here, seat up here. Welcome. We're going to fill up this audience, and then there's going to be space upstairs for people who are in the overflow audience. At that meeting in New York, we established the U.S. Network for Democracy in Brazil as a decentralized, democratic, nonpartisan national network with 3 objectives. Are people getting earphones? Pessoas que precisam de tradução. Está funcionando? Não está funcionando? Então, se não estiver funcionando, levanta a mão e alguém vai te ajudar a conseguir outro aparelho de tradução. The 3 objectives of the National Network were to educate the U.S. public about the current situation in Brazil, to defend progressive social and economic, political, and cultural advances in Brazil, and to support social movements, community organizations, NGOs, universities, and activists who will be vulnerable in this new political climate. At the event, we organized 14 working groups to focus on different aspects of Bolsonaro's policies and their impact on different sectors of Brazilian society. We also set up a national steering committee, which currently has 40 affiliated organizations. We agreed to carry out a first national campaign surrounding the March 14th anniversary of the assassination of Marielle Franco and Anderson Gomes, and as far as we can tell, 50 events took place throughout the United States that week. We also suggested a Washington, D.C. strategy of strengthening the excellent work of NGOs such as the Center for Economic and Policy Research, Amazon Watch, the AFL-CIO, and the Washington Office on Latin America, to mention only some of the groups involved in advocating for Brazil in Congress. And today, Jean Wyllys and Ben Martel and Mariana Adams and I went to meet with Congressman Cicilline here in his office in Providence, one of the 2 congressmen from Rhode Island. He's very supportive of the work we're doing. He has signed the letters from Congress about the situation in Brazil, and we have another ally locally to help us on Brazil. And finally, Brown University offered to set up the U.S. Observatory for Democracy in Brazil, a website that will serve as a hub and a clearinghouse to disseminate information in English about the current situation in Brazil. And on Saturday, one of the panels, Organizing Resistance in the United States, will offer a preview of the observatory's website content. Currently, over 1,500 people are receiving our bi-weekly newsletter, and 234 colleges and universities throughout the United States, as well as activists from different groups and cities across the nation. We currently have supporters in 45 states and the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., and observers from Canada, Israel, and France attending our monthly steering committee meetings. And if anyone has any contacts who are interested in working on Brazil in Hawaii, Alaska, North Dakota, Montana, and Mississippi, please let us know, because we want to reach a goal of having members in all 50 states of the Union. We can also be very excited about the recent victory of activists affiliated to the network in New York and around the country and internationally, who shamed the Natural History Museum into canceling the use of its facilities for the gala event sponsored by the U.S.-Brazilian Chamber of Commerce honoring Jair Bolsonaro, as well as the decision of Mayor Bill de Blasio to veto a second location. And it's very interesting because when Jair Bolsonaro went to the Chamber of Commerce in 2017, people who attended the meeting told me that the people in finances and business were absolutely shocked at how illiterate he was about the economy of Brazil. And yet a year later, they're honoring him as a great person, the man of the year for Brazil. Over the years, the departments of Portuguese and Brazilian studies, faculty members in departments across the university, and more recently the Brazilian Initiative, have worked to promote the study of Brazil in the United States. We have paid particular attention to the situation of Afro-Brazilians and other historically marginalized groups, Brazil's socioeconomic problems, and the rich cultural production in media, literature, and the arts. To encourage the study of Brazil nationally, our provost supported hosting the Brazilian Studies Association's National Secretariat for a 5-year period from 2015 to 2020, and we organized the 12th International Conference of the Brazilian Studies Association at Brown in 2016. At that meeting, the BRASA membership passed a resolution titled "Brazilian Democracy is Seriously Threatened," that criticized the overreach of the judiciary and the imminent impeachment of President Rousseff. In 2016, we invited Congressman Wyllys to spend a week at Brown University, and we organized an East Coast tour for him to speak at Harvard, the CUNY Grad Center, George Washington University, and in Washington, D.C. And in 2017, Brown hosted former President Dilma Rousseff, who was warmly welcomed. This semester, the Watson Institute sent an invitation to Fernando Haddad to come to Brown as a distinguished lecturer. It was very wonderful to see this was not an initiative of the Brazil activists on campus, but the administration said we would like to invite Fernando Haddad to come to Brown. And we're very excited about his coming sometime this fall. These public figures and others who have been at Brown before, Fernando Cardoso and Marina Silva, represent a large, broad range of visions about Brazil and its future. And in that regard, Brown has attempted to serve as a location where serious academic debates can be conducted following the mission of the Watson Institute, which is the building that we're in today, which is co-sponsoring this event, and where we are also housed, which has the mission of, and I quote, "promoting a just and peaceful world through research, teaching, and public engagement." Our intention in this conference is to encourage such an open debate about the ways in which democracy is being threatened in Brazil and how we can support those forces fighting for a peaceful and just Brazil, free of inequalities, racism, homophobia, misogyny, environmental degradation, and socioeconomic disparities. Tonight's opening panel will set the stage for our analysis over the next 3 days. We also hope you will also linger at a reception tonight after the panel. Friday and Saturday, we have designed two-hour sessions, 3 each day, asking the 3 panelists to speak only 20 minutes, so all of you will have ample time to ask questions and make comments about the issues raised in that panel. We hope this conference will be an opportunity to enrich our understanding of the current situation in Brazil and how we can defend democracy in that country. And so on Sunday morning, for those of you who can still be with us, we plan to have an open forum with academics and activists to discuss tactics and strategies for the immediate future. Before beginning with our opening panel, a few acknowledgments are in order. I would like to first thank the organizing committee, Juri Augusto, Bruna Carvalho from Harvard, who will be here later in the week, Sidney Shalubi from Harvard, Keisha Camperi, who has another commitment and cannot be here, Layla Landon, who will be with us tomorrow, and Ramon Stern, who deserves a special round of applause for all the work he's done. We are also very grateful for the sponsors of this event, the Brazil Initiative, the Latino Research Institute at the Hutchins Center at Harvard, the Open Society Foundation, Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs, the Kogan Institute of Humanities, the Department of Portuguese and Brazilian Studies, the Department of History, the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies, Africana Studies, and the Center for Slavery and Justice. And in addition to thanking Ramon, I would like to thank all of the other people at Brown University, the Brazilian visiting scholars, the professors, the students who have built a community here of people who care about Brazil and want to see changes in the country, a Brazil that we've dreamed of having and we've lost for a period of time. And finally, our two interpreters who have the hardest job in this whole conference, Jordan Jones and Marina Adams from the Department of Portuguese and Brazilian Studies. Muito obrigado. Boa conferência. And so I would like to call our three panelists to the stage, Débora Diniz, Jean Wyllys, and Márcia Tiburi, which will free up 3 spaces in the front row. I'm going to introduce them as a group and then let them speak, each 20 minutes approximately, in Portuguese. So Débora Diniz is the Deputy Director of IPPF, the International Planned Parenthood Foundation, World Health, WHR means what?
Western Hemisphere.
Western Hemisphere. And an organization dedicated to sexual and reproductive health and rights in Latin America and the Caribbean. She has brought several high-level cases to the Brazil High Courts about abortion rights. An anthropologist by training, she is also a documentarian whose 8 films have received more than 50 awards. Débora is a visiting scholar at the Brown Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies here. Jean Wyllys has a BA in journalism from the Federal University of Bahia and an MA in literature and linguistics from the same university. Before being exiled, and all of you probably know that he is currently outside the country because of death threats, he had begun his 3rd mandate as a federal congressman in Rio de Janeiro representing the Partido do Socialismo e Liberdade, the Party of Socialism and Freedom. He is a prominent defender of human rights in Brazil. And Márcia Tiburi has a BA in philosophy and visual arts and an MA and PhD in philosophy, and 14 other books including How to Talk to a Fascist, Politically Ridiculous, and Feminism and Common Sense. She writes about culture, gender, aesthetics, and politics. And the title of our panel tonight is one that we invented but perhaps is not precise in its content. But the opening panel is what does it mean to be a political exile under the Bolsonaro government? And I'm going to let the panelists themselves explain their identity in this regard. So I'm going to ask each of you to speak for 20 minutes. And Débora, por favor.
Muito boa noite a todos vocês. É prazer muito grande estar aqui. Eu agradeço em particular.
I would like to thank in particularly Brazil Initiative for the organization of this event, and especially to James Green, Professor Márcia Tiburi, and Jean Wyllys. I think for the 3 of us to be together in this moment. Today, I intend to answer the question of this topic. What does it mean to be a political exile? The first victim of this wave of Bolsonaro's power. can the exile be described as an individual decision or a sentence imposed by the militias who are terrorizing people in Brazil? For the people who understand the fragility of democracy in Brazil, it's true that Brazil still lives under a democratic regime. Its institutions operate with reasonable, but it's exactly in this false of normality that the terror apparatus moved into producing the figure of the exiled in a still democratic regime. There's a hidden universe about the democratic superficiality of the country. It is the parallel order of the virtual militias, and in Jamilian's case, the real militias. If the virtual militias are all the time are everywhere in the social media frenzy, in Brazil, they were part of the power tactic that made possible electing Bolsonaro, and they continue as a torture, as a structure of terror. That way, I want to say how the exile for us describes our existential situation, showing the limits of the juridical vocabulary in Brazil in order to understand the new order of the force, the use of force, which isn't today by the tank, by the military. Today is for the tertiarization of terror. The imposition of fear is made by the by the cowardice of militias that threaten our lives and democracy. Exile is a very poor juridical category. It is not in the constitution. What is in the Brazilian constitution is the forbiddance of banishing somebody from a country. So the state cannot do that, but it's in this interplay between the silence on exiles and the forbiddance of banishing, that the banishing of people is being used within these parallel and clandestine virtual militias. I don't know who is behind this, but I'm sure that is what but I'm sure that they have interest in this dominant politics. I live depatriated. It was because of my political situations that I was threatened. What I defend displeases the Bolsonaro government and those who support him. I reject those that say that I'm here voluntarily, and that I've also exiled, the self-exiled. If I go back to Brazil, it should have to be under the protection of the Human Rights Secretariat, which would signify a restricted participation in society, culture, and politics. I couldn't even be a professor. Going to the university is now a risk for me and to others. The text of the threats of who threatens me also extends to my students, to my family. There are terror messages with a very explicit language. So the threats have extended from me to my husband, who is here today. So juridically, I chose to exile myself. I don't receive pay. I have an authorization from the university to be here, but I don't get paid. I'm on leave. So in order to disseminate fear, they expect us to make public the threats we receive. I chose not to take part in that. And the University of Brasília knows all the threats that I've received. They are threats that also massacre the university. They are addressed to me, to my colleagues, to my family. So I left Brazil last September. And my husband, to tell you a private story, he already started his leave process with a new argumentation. He said their family were separated, and then he solicited within the partner junction in order to be able to come with me within the law. His request was denied, and he had to request a leave in order to, like I did, deal with personal reasons. Even when he was threatened, his family was threatened, it was understood that he had no basis, no juridical basis to ask for that. At the end of the story, the juridical story, the choice to leave the country was ours, and not an act of survival or protection to those who are attached to us, like students. So like the to the federal government, I'm a federal server in leave in order to treat personal matters. Like I said, that's not true. I had to leave my career. I had to leave my life. I have no return possibility because I had no protection. As a defensor of human rights, this is not a martyrdom. This is not a victimism. It's a resistance act. So the militia, the virtuous militias apparatus goes beyond the individual exile. It is a sentence of exile, banishment. So I will explain 4 consequences, political consequences of how militias, the virtual militias, work. The border, the border between liberty and expression of hate, the disorganization of the institutions, democratic institutions, the imposition of fear as a tactic of dispersion of opposition, political opposition, and the dispersion of the responsibility of the criminal possibility. Hate is not a democratic language. It's an instrument for the extremists to operate with disinformation and moral panic. They are agents of banishment through clandestinity. There's a contagion between the universe of virtual militias and the appearance of liberty of expression. I'm threatened for that. There are awards out for my killing, and I'm still described as an enemy of Brazil. Hate goes from the clandestinity to the contagious surface. And that's the strength that moves the permanent risk for human rights defenders. Every question of juridical matters needs to be answered in light of this historical and political reason of the country, which is our risk to the stability of the democratic principles like the freedom of expression. If forbidding hate is or not censorship, that's our second question in the public debate in Brazil. The right question is who benefits from hate as a technique for dissemination of hate and juridical confusion. So the second consequence is a disorganization of the democratic organizations to face the virtual militias. So we have a problem in terms of facing this in the juridical system. The interpretation of the nefarious effects of lies are not interpreted as a democratic question, an interest of all, but of the public power, political power. That's why it moves filled with false controversies. At the same time, that is ignored as a criminal matter by the Minister of Justice, Sergio Moro. At end, it rests the question if a recent decision by the Supreme Court benefits the power or the people. We are a moment where we have to question the integrity of the Supreme Court in our country. So the third consequence is that the virtual malicious terror goes through various articles of the Penal Code, include that pose threat to the physical person, but they have an important symbolic importance, which is to silence those to participate in the public debate. Wyllys is no longer a congressman. Márcia Tiburi cannot participate of the philosophical events or political after being the candidate for the governor in Rio. Our distance has a secondary effect in other people who share our beliefs. The fear of having the same consequence, the same destiny, keeps people from participating in debates. Just as there is no self-banishment, there is no self-censor. People censor themselves because they are afraid. Finally, there's an intimate relationship between militias and the current power. I don't know if the current power if there's a hierarchical relationship between them, but there is a responsibility, there's a signifier responsibility, and in this confusion, I don't care about who sends me threats. What I care about is that these anonymous subjects are substituted by others just like them if they are caught by the police. So my question is, to whom those who threaten me serve? It's the same questions we have to ask about global terrorism. In Brazil, at this moment, the virtual militias that impose to us banishment serve the populist right installed in power. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank the Watson Institute, Brown University, and especially Jim Green for this new visit to this institution. It's an honor to be here and to be next to two brilliant women and two friends in this event that in which we'll discuss the progress of Brazil and the reality of our banishment or exile. And I announced in January this year that I would not go back to Brazil to assume the position to which I was elected because of death threats that were made against me and my family. It wasn't a surprise to anyone because people aren't really, and this is kind of a normal thing, it was a surprise because people usually don't give up power even if they run a risk in doing that. I sent this message from abroad, but I wanted to share the story that led to that decision. And then that story goes back to 2011, my arrival in the Chamber of Deputies, with as the first openly gay member of Parliament. And I wanted to pursue the LGBT questions and and defend that community, transsexuals and gay people and lesbians. And in that parliament, there was a deputy who was openly gay, but he didn't have, he didn't show any pride in being gay. He didn't assume that homosexuality publicly. And so I wanted to, kind of fill this role, and while this congressman he was ashamed to kind of proclaim himself as gay, I wanted to be different from him and show pride in my homosexuality and open these issues for LGBT questions. So my arrival at the parliament in this way, at first glance, it put in check those public discourses that criminalized homosexuality or tried to make gay people feel shame. So I was disrupting the order of society that those that perpetuated fear, homophobia, and so Pentecostal, neo-Pentecostal churches, especially those of the evangelical groups, were very uncomfortable with my presence there, and they really didn't want to share the same table, the same rooms with me. And one especially was he was uncomfortable with my presence there and the things that I was raising for the agenda, the issues in favor of human rights. And this person chose to then adopt his agenda as being, tearing me down, essentially. And so religious, chauvinist talks and comments, they were adopted by this person to kind of undermine me. So I started to receive threats in 2011 because I was openly gay and because I was proud of that, which for a homophobic society, homosexuality has to be experienced as a shameful aspect. You have to be ashamed of it. You can't claim rights and equality just like a heterosexual person would be able to. So this person that I'm talking to about is Jair Bolsonaro, who is now the president of the Brazilian Republic. In 2011, Bolsonaro insulted me, and from that time until now, he's been openly insulting me in front of my colleagues, in front of the Chamber of Deputies and federal chambers and government, and you're talking about chamber and camera, which in Portuguese are very similar words. But in front of the cameras in the chamber, he would insult me, and with no shame. And this was not taken as a violence, as an aggression against me, and it wasn't seen as breaking the decorum of the parliament. People didn't view this as a violence against me because homophobia, they normalize these kinds of actions against LGBT people. Even somebody who was elected and who occupies a position of power in the parliament. So after 2016, beginning in 2016, I should say, the 2014 elections happened. I was reelected, and I had a majority. We were in the kind of the final stages of the democracy in Brazil and the Lula period in Brazil, which were kind of the golden years, and all of the progress, social progress that was gained during that period. So I represented those gains and those changes that happened in our country. And so I defended the freedom, personal liberties, and I had the support of people who were concerned with those issues. In 2016, when 2014, when I was, starting my second term, and I was defending Dilma Rousseff. When I was, campaigning for Dilma Rousseff, I noticed a change in the relationships with these people to me. And in 2016, the threats they went to a next level, and these threats started coming not just from the religious fundamentalists, but also anti-labor party people, and and there's these three groups. Those those who have interest in the agriculture, in weapons, and in the Bible. In other words, evangelists. These people are those who support the kind of threats. So these people, they're elected to power, but they're beholden to these groups, these arms groups, these large ranchers, and they exert pressure on them to pass laws and to defend their interests, and that's often at the expense of the poor and those who don't have the means to defend themselves. So Christian fundamentalists are another group, the Catholic Church. Those who are anti-feminist, and those who are Pentecostal fundamentalists who are homophobic, and this anti-feminist sentiment. So this political group, these groups that were in the chamber, you see this phenomenon in other aspects of society, and so they started threatening me starting in 2016, and so they weren't just about the fact of my being gay. They were also because I was defending democratic values and defending Dilma's government because she was democratically elected, and we know that her impeachment was nothing more than a coup, made possible by groups who hadn't won in 4 election cycles. And so in 2018, these threats went to another level still. And they started to have to deal with organized crime, and that has tentacles in the state, in the government, and they dominate, they control territories and places in Rio de Janeiro. Michel Temer became president after the coup, and to become more popular, because he was very unpopular, to try and increase his popularity, he talked a lot about public security, and which was a big issue at that time, and it was a very hot issue for the extreme right in Brazil, and so he started to lie blatantly, and to harass and to go to burials of people and attack their families. So the extreme right would assume this role, and they were the voice of that extreme right. So, and one of their questions or one of their issues is public order, right? Them versus us. The problems like crime in cities, and they, rather than solving the problems that are the cause of crime, they blame people, and so public security is a really important issue, and so Michel Temer, the now president, he decided to address this issue, and he decided to kind of impose public security in Rio, which becomes kind of necropolitics, to cite a well-known South African thinker, and this is a state in which criminal organizations belong to the state. So the federal intervention in the public security resulted in they're putting themselves in these relationships, and so the democracy in Brazil was in decline, and I would say the peak of this was the assassination of Marielle Franco, who was an openly gay congresswoman, and who shared her agenda, has a lot in common with mine. So the murder, the assassination of Marielle sent a very strong message to the progressive, the left, that those who oppose the anti-democratic groups and the militias, virtual and real militias. So the real militias that kind of function in these states, who include policemen, who include government officials, these militias, they also participate they're also part of the virtual militias, and go to chat rooms on the web, and they talk about homosexuality, and these are the places from which death threats against me, Márcia Tiburi. That's where these threats come from. So these three groups started to threaten me in a very real way. And, as a punishment for my having put myself in the position of defending Dilma and defending democracy, they wanted to punish me for this, and they started to kind of slander me in a very real way, in a very focused way, and they wanted to destroy my image and push me out of the government. And so, if I weren't physically eliminated, I would be symbolically eliminated. So this process of slander, focused on my homosexuality and try to represent the LGBT community as something that's abject, that's unacceptable. And fake news, which are not new, they go back to the Nazism and to fascism and populism, but the fake news gains a new aspect, a new power with technology, with the internet, and so they erase the line between truth and lies, between facts and versions. So they use pieces of truth and then they twist them to kind of get their message across. And they rely on biases, prejudices that people have that are oftentimes subconscious. So people don't know they have these biases, these prejudices, but fake news kind of pulls it out of them and capitalizes on that. And so this causes a moral panic. This idea that homosexuals have an unbridled, aggressive sexuality that's dangerous to society. And so they made me into kind of a prisoner within my own country. I couldn't even act publicly because people would threaten me, people would insult me, and I'm not talking about people who threatened me before. I'm talking about normal people, just random people. They would see me, and they would think it's normal that people would threaten me, and that they saw this as a way of fighting the enemy of the nation, the enemy of the family, the enemy of the fatherland or the motherland, which was me. And after Marielle's murder, I realized that the threats they could actually become real. Marielle was chosen based on a bunch of prejudices to send a message. Prejudice, bias. They thought that was the motivating cause. They thought if they killed this bisexual black woman, that there would be no reaction in society, and that we think she was chosen because there were no threats made against her before. But those people were wrong, right? They thought there would be no consequences, but her death has caused a huge reaction in Brazil, but it wasn't enough for me to feel like I was out of danger. And so I was escorted 24 hours a day. I had bodyguards, but it wasn't everywhere. So it was only at my job. So I was just at home or I was at work, and this was not a life for me. It was killing me inside. So if I wasn't killed, physically, if I wasn't going to be killed, by someone who was going to kill a gay man and then with impunity and not be punished, then they wanted to kill me kind of inside, emotionally. And so I began to this idea of leaving the government, started to develop in my mind. I still wasn't planning on leaving the country, but leaving my office. And I realized it was an individual decision to, as Débora said, but it was an injunction. I was kind of forced to make this decision by this new state, this new government, this new administration. And so what became clear to me was that Bolsonaro was going to be elected. People didn't listen to me. People, even in my own political party, they didn't believe me. Because people in my political party, they were worried about the the possibility that they were talking about their agenda was more economic, and people didn't realize that this was an ideological battle. That this was not a question of just economics. It was a question of democracy, of the integrity of our government. And Bolsonaro, they would say, he doesn't get any airtime. He's never going to win. And security wasn't an issue for people to the left. It was for the liberals. And so they were sure that Bolsonaro would not win the election. So they weren't part of the minority. They didn't live that reality and experience that reality as I did, as blacks did, as all the minorities, indigenous people, this growth of the extreme right. And so for this reason, people didn't listen to me. They told me I had the Cassandra syndrome, which is the syndrome of being able to see the future, but not being able to convince anyone that it's actually going to happen. So Cassandra wasn't able to convince people because she was a woman. In my case, it was because I'm a gay man. So I decided to leave the country, and I decided to, take advantage of this time to leave, and so that these wounds that are still open could heal, because it wasn't just a threat against me; it was against my family. But the impact of this decision was so great that from then to now, I still keep thinking about this, and I want to defend democracy, not just in Brazil, but in the world. And these new populisms, these new populists of the extreme right, they have something in common. Beyond fake news, they're using fake news and questionable electoral processes. They look back on a glorious past that never existed. They talk about law and order. Them versus us, and them is always the minorities, and in all these processes, there's a kind of homophobia that, when I use the term homophobia, I want to talk about the moral panic that is involved with gender, sexuality, masculinity being threatened by the empowerment of women and the LGBT community, and so this is why I continue on this front, defending democracy in Brazil and those who stayed there, because lots of people can't do what I and Márcia Tiburi and Débora Diniz did. They can't leave the country. Many can't. They're still there. They're threatened, and the way to protect these people is to raise our voice and speak on their behalf. Thank you. I'd like to thank James Green for this invitation to participate in this special moment for all of us. And I'd like to, thank the university. And I'd like to say that I'd like to express my joy in being here next to Débora and Wyllys, and the fact that we're alive here and have this opportunity to speak to you. So we don't have much time, and I may have written too much, but I thought it was better to write this text. I'm going to publish it on a blog on Wednesday, the full thing, and here I'm going to do kind of a summary and read some passages. So, but I needed to write this text because I'm tired of telling my own story. And in these last few months, talking to institutions that protect us and telling this story to friends, we get tired of our own story. And writing it helps us to describe it, to elaborate, and it's just a different way to express and to describe our experience. And it allows us to reflect as well, and the power of testimony as well, of witness that our experiences are part of. But so I'm going to start reading this text because there are some issues that I feel are really important, and in between I'll stop in between to talk about what happened to me I'll try to be objective. So, dear friends in Brazil, there's a wound in Brazil right now. We all know what's going on, and there are unthinkable things that are happening today that mount back to fascism. And this has been present in the past and is present now. All of President Bolsonaro's project to destroy our country with the lie or the illusion of building it up again is his whole project. So he is influenced by the groups that have weapons, that produce weapons and sell them, and so he's implicated. He's related to these groups, and we call this psycho power. We're trying to fight against it on different fronts, and we're all threatened. It's the anti-intellectual fight that fascists have engaged in, throughout history. The people that have fallen into their trap maybe haven't had time to realize what's going on. It's never, it's never false to say that there's genocide in Brazil, just like genocide of the LGBT community and other minorities. And this is done very subtly, very secretly, but it's real. And I believe in this moment of Brazilian history that it's necessary to tell this story, to remove from the shadows what's being hidden, and we need to show what's hidden. We need to each assume our own role and take a part in fighting this wave. And I'm grateful to have my friends here next to me as we are witnesses of the persecution of which we're victims. We're called witches, and we know what that feels like. Witches are, women, LGBT people are called witches, and they aren't. Witches are not able to survive and tell their stories, but we've survived so far. And my role as a professor of philosophy is to restore truth to Brazil. And this Operation Car Wash is one of the lies, that is used to attack the ex-president Lula. And there are many supporters throughout the government and throughout this car wash operation. And our participation in this debate is important. There's a lot of threats against professors and teachers in which they can't talk about sexuality openly in school, and there's this repression, and there's this Jean and Débora, and we were all persecuted for this. We were fired from universities because we spoke out about gender in favor of legalizing abortion and things like that. And so there's a production of an imaginary that's really pitted against any perspective, any research, any serious academic work that has as its goal, expanding human rights. So in this way, we need to talk about the structural institution of the state, but also be attentive to the questions of how we think about the world, how we think about fascism. And I wrote this book, How to Talk with a Fascist. And Jean Wyllys talked about the Cassandra complex, being able to see the future but not being able to convince anyone that it was actually going to happen. One of my books was not. This book was not published at the time because it had the word fascist in it. And then I have this book, Political Ridicule or Ridiculous Politics. And I talk about the coup against Dilma Rousseff, and these books were also used against me by the groups that came to attack me, and so I'm talking about these books because my own story is and of my persecution is confused, it's intertwined with the attacks on my books. So the titles are attacked. I'm attacked by these groups through the attacks on the books, and I'll tell a few details later that might be interesting to you guys. So we should talk about witch hunts and what they have against real people, and also against what they have in terms of diffuse and generic, broad arguments. And one of these witches, how these witches are persecuted, are hunted down, are burned. Things like preventing women and children from gaining a voice, and this has been something that's happened throughout Brazil's history. And now we're being hunted by the same groups as always. Today I got a message from a young person on Instagram, and I quote: "Do society a favor, die," end quote. I always wanted to kind of discard and ignore these kinds of questions. Even though I've received thousands of them, and in your case, Jean-Wyllys and Débora, maybe it's probably even more than that. I wanted to ignore those. I'd like to, think that we're just in kind of a bad moment, in a funk, and that we'll snap out of it. Lula's government was able to have some progress in terms of social rights, human rights, but as time has gone by, I'm realizing that these kinds of comments and threats are they're a trend. They're fashionable today. Since 2013, from now, the coup in 2016, all of these things are coalescing into this environment in Brazil in which these kinds of comments are normalized. Débora talked about fear, hate. Hate is definitely related to fear, and it's necessary to stimulate hate so that we can destroy the symbolic context of democracy. Hate is the diabolic element that corrupts politics. So discourse of hate and of threatening people, which I'm used to. I'm used to being criticized, attacked because I'm a woman and I'm a public figure. And I wrote a book or a text that is the general theory of cussing people out or of being criticized, and so I wanted to kind of break that discourse down and talk about how we can how you can kind of move forward that as a public figure, and this hate. This work this methodological work of criticizing people and of trying to break them down has really become stronger recently. So threats are not just discourse of hate now. They reflect a disposition of being of wanting to act soon. And Adorno, he talks about this. He talks about the potential fascist, who's very present in my analyses. And the potential fascist is one who's always ready to act. He's always, at any moment, he can do an act of violence, which is, he's encouraged to do by the collective imaginary of the fascists. And so, from thinking to acting, that's what I'm talking about. And in this moment in Brazil, of course, this is part of my story. I wrote a book called The Delirium of Power, collective power and madness. And I try and develop a theory that tries to explain how this psychosis has become so widespread in Brazil, and has become not just a psychiatric category, but a political category. And this is Bolsonaro's big tool in these days. And so we've moved from discourses of hate to threats and to readiness to act. It's not just I hate you. It's I'm going to kill you. It's whenever I see you, you will. I'm going to ask for you to sign your book, and then I'm going to shoot you in the head. I'm going to shoot you in the forehead right after you sign this book. And that was one of the threats that I received recently. It was a young kid who said this to me on Instagram, and he exhibited a certain type of masculinity, and this macho figure, and because I looked through his profile later and saw that this young boy is probably he's a potential fascist. It's possible that he would go from thinking to action, and to want that people like me die. These things are developed on social networks. We are fried. We are attacked by fake news, trying to destroy our reputation, our image, and any person on the street, they want to break us down. When I was in Brazil, I was staying home more. I wouldn't really go out on the street, but I would still every once in a while run into people who would say, "I'm really proud of being a fascist. Lula's in prison, and you're a piranha." They would cuss me out and say things like this to me that were, apparently on the tip of their tongue, and it was incredible to me that these regular people are capable of saying these things to me, and so I want to. I think it's clear that we are all, to use a category that's now famous. We're in a state of exception, and we are homo sacer. In other words, we're not even we're like animals. We don't deserve human right protection. We're witches, and these people want us to fall. They want us to go mad. They want us to, and they try to do this to us through fake news. Okay, so I want to tell you what led me to decide to leave Brazil, and I'm going to try and tell it in a very objective way. I was always a victim of attacks, but I thought these attacks were just part of the gig. But January 24th of 2018, I went to a radio program in Porto Alegre in Rio Grande do Sul to talk about a book that I was launching that's called Uncommon Feminism. And why am I telling you this? Because this book was part of my. It's part of the story of my persecutions in 2018. So I always went to this radio station. I was interviewed about my books, and so I went there. I sat down. It was the day in which Lula was judged and he was condemned. And before beginning the program, we were talking about the political situation and those who were criticizing Lula and confusing people and spreading rumors about him, and people that don't know any better, that don't have that context to know that it's fake news. So there was a door open. Somebody came behind and gave me a kiss on the cheek. I looked at him. I didn't know him, and I thought maybe it was an old student of mine because I gave a lot of students. I gave a lot of classes in Porto Alegre, and then I see another one come in who's got his phone. He's recording, and lots of people today use their phone as a weapon today, recording things, and I was attacked a lot of times with phones recording. Anyway, on this day, when I saw the cell phone, I'm kind of looking around, I don't really understand what's happening. He sits down in front of me, and then I realized that he was a member of a fascist movement in Brazil that was sponsored. It wasn't just a bunch of young boys. It was an organized movement. They're paid to be activists. And so I realized this. I got scared, and hopefully I think they were waiting for me to say something that was weird and unacceptable, anyway, so they recorded this moment in which I got scared, and I thought, I said, what kind of what is this? I'm here to be interviewed. I'm not trying. I don't want to be approached by these kinds of people. So I left. I was pretty shaken up, and so I left, and that night, this video was already going viral on social media, and it was trending on Twitter, and the next day, the viral nature of this video is continuing, and my attitude has always been, and I know it's a mistake now, but my attitude was always, whenever I faced persecution from those kinds of people who are trying to break me down and trying to spread stupidity and ignorance in Brazil, fake philosophers, things like that. I would always say I'm not even gonna. I'm not gonna even say their names. I'll cite Kant, Schopenhauer, others. I'm not even gonna recognize. I'm not gonna give them any importance, because that would kind of elevate their visibility in the public sphere. And so I've never paid any attention to them. But on that day I left, and I realized that it didn't matter, that even though I never engaged with them, they would use me, and just like they did, they would persecute me, and there was a big opposition. People defended me on social media, and they realized that kind of backfired on them, and they decided to take things to the next level. So they got an interview that I had given in 2015, and they kind of cut a clip out of it in which I said, I'm gonna raise an absurd question so that you can understand how we can produce an argument and prove something that's absurd. And so I for example, I can prove that I'm in favor of robbery. So then I went through this. It was totally satirical, but they cut it down so that it seemed like I was in favor of robbery. And reporters came and asked me, "Are you in favor of robbery?" And I said, "Of course not. This was it was taken out of context." But things like this, and people that never met me, people that never read a book of mine, they began to threaten me with death because they thought that I was in favor of assault, of robbery, and they said that they would kill me. They hoped that I was robbed. Well, I mean, everyone in Brazil has already been robbed once, but they cursed me out. They used foul names, and during 2018, these groups, they put my picture on their site of this fascist group, and I was with a new party, the Partido Novo. All of my book launches began to be invaded. They would come to these book launches and just kind of wreak havoc. And so anywhere I went, any public appearance I went, book fairs, appearances, talks, book launches, I kept meeting these people. I've been doing these things for 15 years in Brazil, but these groups, they started to kind of infiltrate these events from the Northeast all the way down to the South. Okay, fine. I was trying to deal with it. But then they started trying to say, okay, well, we'll only let into these events people who buy the book, and so as a way to try and filter out these people. But they would still come in. They would hit people. They would kind of cause chaos. Sometimes they would wait for an hour in line. When there's sometimes there's a line of like 300 people. They would wait for an hour to come in, quiet, composed, but then when there was enough of them in there, they would all put masks on, try and scare me, and I would try and joke with them. Oh, I'm gonna call your mom. You guys need to be more polite. But then when they started to hit people, there were events in which we were really scared. We were really shaken because people got hurt. And there was a day when there was a young boy who came in. We don't know kind of what party he was from, but we were in Belo Horizonte in a book launch. And he came in, and he had a gun in a plastic bag. And in an event, there was, I don't know, 800 people there. And so we were really shaken. We called the police. I only found out about this actually after the event because nobody told me, so that I wouldn't be kind of shaken up about it. But police came. They took him away. And then after, various book launches were canceled, some by me, some by the bookstores that I had lined up with, and it was just a terrible situation. And in Maringá, when they created this page that's not her, which is an allusion to the not him resistance against Bolsonaro. And they promised that they threatened to come armed and to take out these Labor Party supporters. This day was super uncomfortable for me because the city decided, people decided to go to the event. I went to the event, and I was really unsure whether I should go or not. I wanted to, donate some of my archive to the libraries, and it was, it was a political act. The election was already over, and in this city, Sergio Moro was born. People, they were Sonia Braga supporters or Sergio Moro supporters, and they would kind of fight and argue about this. So it was a political act, but it was horrible because I would sign books, but I was really scared, and there was a policeman with a rifle next to me, and all the people in line, they had their bags searched because they were afraid people would come in with a gun. And so it was on that day that I realized that it was no longer possible for me. It wasn't just a question of my personal security. It was a question of the security of the people who read my books, who like my books, who support me, who go to my events. And so I accepted the invitation from an American institution that's, to be a writer in residence there. And so now and then I was moved to Pittsburgh, and I've been there since December. And now I don't have an address. My husband I'm married to a judge who's been persecuted in Brazil for having opposed the coup, and for condemning the state of exception. When they realized he was doing a postdoctorate in Paris, I went and visited him for 3 weeks, and when I went there, he started being more persecuted and attacked, and now we're attacked in many ways by the press of the extreme right, and I don't know where I'm going to stay because I don't have a salary, I don't have a grant, I just live off my royalties in Brazil, which are very small, as you can imagine. So I'm going to live wherever I can get a fellowship or grant. In the U.S., I was unable to do it with some institutions because I have European citizenship, which a lot of bureaucracy and prevented me from getting some opportunities. But anyway, I'll live in Japan or India or maybe Chile, Alaska, wherever I'm able to pay the bills and live, a safe life and not be persecuted by people who want to attack me or even kill me. And people say, it's just a threat. But a threat, doesn't mean anything. Marielle was never threatened, but she was killed. And so, threats may not be the real thing, but we are in danger of dying at any moment. And, people they buy into this discourse of hate, and you never know what they're going to do. And so I'm uncomfortable telling this story. I would much prefer to talk, as I did yesterday in Leila Lenin's class, about literature, talk about other topics. I prefer literature to politics. I always have. But we're in the world together, and we need to work together to protect each other and to defend democracy and create a world in which we have basic rights guaranteed. And I'm very thankful for you guys for being here and for listening to this collective expression, of kind of raising issues and trying to defend the truth. And it's really important that we do this in this day and age so that we can, improve things in Brazil and live there once again as normal people. And I hope that doesn't take too long. Thank you.
Nós temos tempos para perguntas, então eu vou fazer blocos de 3 perguntas. E aí nós vamos fazer isso até às 8 e depois terá uma recepção lá fora. Então, quem quiser fazer perguntas, vamos fazer de 3 em 3 perguntas. Comentários também são bem-vindos. Quem vai ser o primeiro?
My name is Pedro Paulo. I'm going to talk about economy and the attack on the economy in Brazil. I really appreciated your talks. Now, I wanted to ask you. I know you guys are far away from Brazil, but how do you feel about the first 100 days of Bolsonaro's government? Because my impression is that. And it's the impression of somebody who's very involved in that crazy life is that it's lots of things are changing. In other words, a lot of the political capital of Bolsonaro that was built. He talked about attacking corruption and getting rid of corruption, and kind of cleaning up the Brazilian state and eliminating corrupt people and incompetent people in the government. And those who defended irresponsibly, human rights that didn't deserve to be defended. I think all of this is kind of falling apart, and so I'm wondering if I don't know if this is related to, if this is because I'm being super optimistic, overly optimistic, or if you from abroad are noticing this as well, this movement. If you're having this. If you're seeing this weakening of Bolsonaro's kind of cachet. Hi, I'm Luisa Machado. I'm in the University of Albany in New York. I'm finishing up my doctorate. And when my grant's up, the program through which I came will not exist anymore. Anyway, I wanted to thank you for these talks. It's hard for me to kind of express myself. I'm emotional and reacting to your emotions as well. But I'm grateful to. I've had the opportunity to be with Márcia and Débora before and to participate a little bit in this resistance and act as a doctoral student and try and support Brazil from abroad. And because there are times in which it feels like we're not doing anything to help, and that we're giving 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Anyway, in the commemoration of Marielle's death, in March, we talked about the need for there to be international denunciation, international accusation of what's going on. And so I thought, okay, fine. Let's try and do this. Let's try and raise the visibility of what's going on in Brazil and try and expand our circles and things. But I still think that we're only talking to ourselves. There's a barrier that we haven't been able to break through. How do we tell people, tell other Brazilians who are kind of in between? They're not the extreme right. They're not a Bolsonaro supporter, but they're kind of in between. They're not sure. How do we tell them this is a state of exception? It looks like a democracy, but it's not. And these people are political exiles. This is not, I wanted to go abroad and travel and go to Europe. That's not the case. It was not their choice. And so I'm wondering, I see that, some people in groups, they don't realize what's going on. And so I feel like I'm talking to people that are already aware of the situation, and so I'm wondering how to reach out to the other groups, those who, how can I tell them that we are in the U.S. and that we're saying we need to tell the world, we need to yell out to the world that this is not normal, this should not be happening, and that we need to change things. I don't even know how we're going to change yet, but I want to tell people what's going on, and I'm wondering, if you have any thoughts about that topic. First, I wanted to thank you three, Débora, Jean, Márcia, for making yourselves available and to tell your stories. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. So I'm Marlon. I'll introduce myself tomorrow. I'm Marlon. I'm from the federal government, and but I'm here because I'm Jim's friend, and that's the only reason. So I wanted to. Fundamentally, I wanted to ask you about this, because every time we tell our story, it's part of the process of being re-victimized, of kind of opening up that trauma again. And so we need, a hug, we need an embrace, we need support, and I wanted to support you in that way. I wanted to take this opportunity. Yesterday, I was having dinner with some people talking about human rights in the United States, and the topic came up that Jean mentioned, this false dichotomy between social and economic and identity groups, and people talk about these questions, and they say it's part of the democratic process, and how do these groups contribute or not to these movements? So I wanted to talk about to take advantage of this really great opportunity to have you four sitting down together. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about just a few words about the false dichotomy of these groups, the identity and the socioeconomic groups.
I'm going to try to answer all questions in one, because they all connect. Before that, I just want to say that the threats against me have been documented and registered in numerous reports with the federal police that open investigations that went nowhere. And in front of this inefficiency of the state, I did appeal to the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights, where everything was documented, and the members asked for a cautionary measure to protect me from the Brazilian state. It's not a personal choice to leave the security of my country, which was not secure anymore, in order to live in insecurity abroad. Today, a reporter asked me a question that shook me. How is it to wake up and be conscious that you're not in your country and not able to go back? People have no idea what that is. In order to say to us that we're just being tourists, I just want people to step in my shoes and realize how awful this is. As I said, since I stepped down, I haven't been able to go back and take care of myself, because I need to be in this front of how this democracy downfall threatens minorities. I've noticed that there is a change, yes. There isn't a doubt, I think, in a lot of fields that Brazil is no longer a democracy. There is no doubt that Brazil does not live a democracy. I talk with the European Parliament in Geneva, on UN's headquarters, different places. There is a sense, there is a changing, a shift that Brazil's democracy is no longer full. That we have a government that it is at least a populist, alt-right populist, if not fascist. So this idea is already becoming the majority in the world. But there isn't also a doubt that there is a right populism in Hungary, in Brazil, and here with Trump. So what's in common with all those governments is that each of them exercises a kind of fascism in their own way. So some are more open, like Brazil, and some just turn their back on policies, on fascist policies, like the US. So after 100 days of government, where government has not proposed any public policy, with the except of the Social Security reform, which is an attack against labor, is attacked against all the progressive change in labor since the 20th century. And the other one, which is the anti-crime package, which is only a further authorization of the policy of police to execute people beyond the judiciary system. I don't even need to bring statistics here, but whoever wants, and I have it, it is the young black people who live in peripheries who are being murdered by the police. So an example of this is Padilha's letter to Folha de São Paulo newspaper, which I replied to in my blog today. So even though perspectives are clear on this, these governments are ruling for the economic minorities against the social minorities in Brazil, social majority. So it's a combination of conservative discourse in the private sphere with a radical neoliberal agenda with an economically wise. So that had happened before in history, and it's always a danger with this comparisons, but that had happened before with fascism and Nazism of the 30s. So now we have a new challenge, and I speak about this in my book, that is my upcoming book. I take the Matrix allegory in order to talk about these dystopic imagination of the future that actually is a description of the present in the second half of the 20th century. So we are fighting now against bots, against robots, against algorithms that keep us from bursting into different bubbles. So we are trying to tell people they are encapsulated in bubbles that are produced by algorithms and who are attacked by robots, those virtual militias. But they are real, but have like one person in charge of 300 different profiles. We have reached this point, and the democratic world's challenge is how to deal with this. So Zuckerberg has decided to banish from Facebook stream rights pages from UK because Brexit had already been influenced by fake news on Facebook. The American elections, the Brazilian elections have all been impacted by fake news. So the robots operated, the algorithm operated, constructing, building bubbles that keep dialogue from happening. I think that a way to burst through that is multiplying personal spaces where we can talk about with person people. I think that if people are against actually facing what is happening, they become, it's a problem of character. And with people who have bad characters and who are fascists, dialogue is impossible.
Just to kind of piggyback on what Jean was talking about, which I subscribe to everything he said. But this week on last Monday, I published on Libération an article that has a title that's "We that see democracy die, we wait for thee." And it was an allusion to French history, and Brazil is a lab. It's a great big guinea pig. It's a country that's very desirable, very interesting. destroying Brazil is good for the extreme right. You know, we know the coup was a coup of governments that serve the neoliberal wave, and we are in a second wave of of neoliberalism. Excuse me. We're trying to kind of navigate our way through this in Chile and Brazil and these other economies that are destroyed economies. Turkey, Hungary. We might be able to think that these authoritarian states are actually states that serve an economic power, and we know that Brazil will not be abandoned. And so I also believe that we need to, because the coup is happening in the world, in the whole world, and it's international, we need to create a democratic international. And we could talk about a communist or a socialist international movement, but we need an international democratic movement. And we need to, because this is an international phenomenon, we need to act internationally to kind of undermine and break down this movement. And we need to raise our voices, Brazilians in our fields. All these voices are fundamental, they're essential, but also the voices of Americans, French, Turkish people, and whoever is being attacked and massacred, and also those who are being threatened, because neoliberalism is not makes strategic decisions, but it's also there to, it doesn't really distinguish between people. It's in power. It's the ruling ideology, and it doesn't really distinguish between people. And so you got people looking for Venezuelan oil. There's Brazilian oil that was discovered in 2006. This is a super interesting topic. So everyone's seeing what's happening, but what strength do we have? What power do we have in the face of this kind of delirious production, this obsession with money and with capitalism? So how do we combat this? We don't, Jean talked about breaking into other spheres and raising our voice in other environments. So, we're here right now. We're in a very important university. We're in a certain position of privilege for, the fact that we're here. But we know very well that where this is going to end up. So we know that there will be more slaughter, more bloodbaths. There's going to be a lot more dead people, and Brazil will be destroyed. There will not be, limitation. You shouldn't have hope. Hope has been bad for our struggle. I'm telling this to you, kind of in between us, because of course we're gonna act with a lot of hope, but don't have theoretical hope, because these theoretical hopes, we talked about, there's not going to be a coup. Well, there was a coup. Bolsonaro is not going to get elected. Well, those of us who could see what was happening, we knew that Bolsonaro was going to be elected. I myself ran for office to try and keep this from happening, but it didn't matter. It didn't do any good. And people are being devoured. They're being crushed by a process which in Brazil is part of the story of big news outlets and social media. People were kind of crushed and transformed into robots, and this process is going to keep going. We know that we will be that in the end we're going to have a big portion of our population will be massacred, and this massacre's already started. When somebody is shot 80 times, being a normal person, well, a black person, of course, is chosen by the army, and all the ramifications this has had, Marielle and others, and Lula being in prison, we know that this will not stop. This is a huge test that will be, that the rest of the world will be submitted to. Is stimulated by those who are kind of really ingrained in capitalism. So we need to continue this anti-racist, anti-racist fight, and we need to focus on basic human rights for everyone. This is an ancient fight. It's been happening for a long time. It's a loot it's a fight for people's lives, and we're not threatened without any consequences. Those are real threats.
I need to start by confess that, unlike Jean and Márcia, I couldn't imagine that he would win, that Bolsonaro would win. So maybe my capacity for political analysis was a little bit more limited. But I would dare to say I'm permanently hopeful. It's not about being naive. I'm not naive, but the day that I give up hope is the day that I can't do what I do anymore, which is write and exist. And I want hope to be a category, our category. It's not going to be taken from us like the identity agenda, which is your question. That seems like such a fundamental question. Last week at an event in Harvard, somebody made it exactly like that. Wasn't us from the LGBT movement, the feminist movement, the black movements that created the fragmentation? It's important to see how this question is targeted to us, right? As if it was our fault in creating fragmentation. But that question is false. That's a false idea because those things are not incompatible. It is because there is homophobia that people are able to ask about gay movements being a fragmentary endeavor. So nobody can say they don't like poor people, but they can say, because this idea that class is the great question, right? So it's a false question because it does not allow us to think about the depth of discrimination, because there are lower class people who are gay, lower class people who are women. So it's not a question because those are issues that affect everyday life, but it's a question that plays on the homophobia, the machismo of people who make it and who agree with it. So I would say that during the first 100 days, we have lived two effects. One is the sentimentality of the people. So it's the feeling that of resentment that cannot move forward. Our challenge is getting from resentments the ability of positively move forward. And then you ask me how to do that outside the bubble. Maybe this is where lies my hope. We have a strength, which is in this us against you narrative they do not have. They are not here at Brown in this moment talking with those who think and who are going to bring back the truth. It's up to us to let people know that we are living in this moment of pre-truth. You know, who spoke it? Where did they speak it? When did they speak it? These bubbles are collapsing. And when they collapse, that's when we are going to colonize the return to truth. They don't have the intellectuals at Brown. We do. Three more questions and 3 quick answers.
Good afternoon. My name is José Antonio. I'm from Portugal. I'm a professor and I'm also a lawyer. My question is, we have to be more lucid, we have to kind of show how lucid we are, how clearly we think, and we need to be contagious. But we also need to be, in the first place, we need to, an international democratic movement. The international right is something that people can feel in Brazil a lot more. They they feel the lack of this state more than they feel the lack of democracy. And so Jean-Wyllys said, I was democratically elected. The last election was not a democratic election. But people feel that there's that somebody goes, somebody's in their car and they get shot 80 times. So people are worried about the security, the insecurity, and they're worried about preserving these human rights and these natural or these fundamental rights. And so this seems to me like a big problem. To create a consciousness of that there is an extreme right that's being created and is gaining force in the United Nations and internationally.
Hi, my name is Wyllys Sacramento. I'm from a fishing community in Bahia. This is the first time that I have contact with the three of you together, and I like to congratulate all of you on your talks. But I feel the absence of some elements. I think it's important to say that Marielle was not assassinated just because there wasn't an antecedent of threat. We know that in Brazil, that the cheapest meat in the market is the black meat. So Marielle being a woman, a black woman from the favela, from Maré, all determines her killing. So that's a determinate element that for us, it doesn't need threats. We don't need to be threatened in paper because we're daily killed. So when I received the invitation to be here, an indigenous leadership advised me not to come, because when I come back, what could happen to me in the airports after I speak what I have to speak here? So I also think a more complete analysis that goes beyond the 3 months that anteceded the election is we're missing that analysis, because in Brazil we already lived a fragile democracy. Being from traditional communities, we're already suffering coups before the political coup because our rights have been systematically violated. So I think that the Brazilian left, which is the Brazilian intellectuality, the intellectual world, even though that not for choice, as John said, you had the option to be in spaces like this. Some of us, a lot of us, most of us are daily threatened, and we have no place to go, and we don't want to leave. So we don't want to. So you, as black and white women, as white men and women who are privileged, how do you take this voice that can make a denunciation be amplified, also including in the denunciation the questions of traditional and indigenous peoples and the black youth that is being killed?
Take one of them off. You have one ear off. You're talking really loud.
Oh, am I? Sorry.
Hello. I'm Ana Julia. I'm a master's student in the Ouro Preto University. I'm studying philosophy, just like Márcia. And I'd like to, before asking my question, I'd like to say that you are very important to us, even though you're out of the country. When I learned that Jean wasn't coming back, that he wouldn't be a congressman, there was a big reaction to it, and we miss you a lot. I went to Itamaraty, kind of the foreign service, and I was talking about. I didn't really know who Bolsonaro was, but I knew who you were, Márcia. We were in the FIF in 2017. We were there together, and when we learned that you weren't going to come back, what will happen to the philosophy department, especially a department like ours that doesn't accept black people, that doesn't accept LGBT people, and the university doesn't say anything, and we have a resistance movement. We don't have a lot of students there, but there is a movement, and I was reading Gadamer, and I was talking about the role of art, because you're not just a congressman or a professor. I don't know Débora so much, but I really appreciated your talk. You are artists. You deal with our emotions, and so how are you gonna use that power? I'm gonna go back. My friends are there. They're waiting for you. So I don't have social media, but I go to Jean's Instagram account every day because I need that. I need to know where he is. So I just wanted to, kind of communicate the love that we have for you, and even though I've never seen you so close, I had to come here to visit my uncle to end up seeing you so close, and I drove here 2 hours to get here so that I could see you, and you are important, and you will continue to be important whether you're threatened or not. We're just a little movement, a little group, but we follow you. Thank you.
So since this is the last round, I'm going to start, and then Márcia, and then we'll leave the man last. It's a didactic exercise. I wanted to say that what you just said is very emotional to me. This is a moment where all of us need expressions of affection and personal encounters. I know that our questions about who are you, what you represent, those are questions that move all of us all the time. But all of us who are here, we represent not that we are together, but a very a parcel of privilege. We knew that when we were walking in through this door. But the expression of affection allows us a political action. But I wanted to answer this question about who are you, who do you represent when you talk? I think this is a question that legitimates voices that for long have not been recognized. But it is also delegitimizes some talks about who do we talk, and our responsibility and our duty to speak as political representatives. We represent spaces of power of the Brazilian elite that we're all of here are, but we have a responsibility of not silencing ourselves. Silence is an accomplice of privilege. So I wanted to ask that we can change the way we ask questions about representation legitimacy. Beyond that we are, I am this woman that you're seeing, I also want to pass through the responsibility of what I say and what I do not say. I think that that's the political convocation that we need to do.
What is your name again? Ana Júlia. It's nice to meet you. Those FIFs were good, huh? We just talked about things that didn't really matter to anyone, huh? I'm a very hard person. I'm from Rio Grande do Sul. I'm from the south. There's it's really cold in my city. We don't have heat in the buildings. I know how to live in cold and in hunger. I know how to live and survive any type of violence. I'm a gaúcha. I'm strong. But this experience of of exile, this banishment that Débora talked about so eloquently, this has been a good spiritual experience for me. So I interpret it as being a great spiritual moment, as was my candidacy to government. The way I see the world has to do with this. So how do I live and go through these situations in terms of my interior emotions? So I'm not only a strong person, I'm a perverted, or I'm a perverse person. Because I work with literature, and I always talk about transforming myself, transforming people, getting revenge on people. And so what you're talking about, the importance of us, it really moves me in this, this loving and emotional way, and it's very different from what we've been receiving in the context of spiritual impoverishment. And it has to do with our story, with the story that we always have to try and recover. And it has to go with your question, the question that you raised. What is your name again? Eunice. So it's so important what you raised, because this is a fundamental question. When you look at me, you call me white. I'm sad because I don't think it's good that I kind of exude and I look like the privileged person, but I know it's true, and I think all of us here, we're symbols. We represent the fight for democracy, for human rights, a democratic state with all of its problems and limitations. But that was that's a fundamental question. Something that still exists in the U.S. and France and Portugal. It does not exist in Italy and all these countries that were taken over by coups. And so I'm talking about this because I think in my perspective, for example, I'm not a white feminist, because I don't believe there exist white feminists. And so if there's a person like me that comes from the low class of society of the whites, who are the descendants of the Italians and the Germans who live in the South of Brazil, different from you you belong to a territory. We're those who are kind of just inserted there, those who are left over, those who are kind of those who can't go back to Europe. We're kind of the dregs of European society. And you called it white privilege, and it's only what that's the only privilege that we have, though we who are from the poor European ancestry. I work with kind of family history and tradition, and I write about this, and there are people that didn't get any rights, any privileges. The only thing that we have is to be a miserable white person, and the only power that I have is to be violent against people who aren't white. And so I think it's really important to recognize this and try and move through this. I don't do white feminism, and I don't think it's even appropriate to call it white feminism. What do? We, after black feminism that taught us the intersectionality, we fight against capitalism, against racism. We fight against prejudice in terms of gender, of sexuality, of age, and we also fight against the prejudice and bias in terms of art and aesthetics. And so we are subjects who, although we're white, we're not racist. And I think this is a very important distinction to make. We talk about the place from which you speak. I usually refer to as the pain from which you speak. And so the place from which you speak is where you construct a dialogue and interact with other people. And we can be kind of figureheads for the fights that we are engaged in. And so I think that our feminism needs to be very dialogic. It needs to be it needs to present itself as a great theory that is capable of changing the structure of society as a whole. I trust feminism not just as a as an act, but also as a constructive act, but also as a destructive in terms of deconstructing the prejudice and the bias of the masculine white patriarchy that exists. And so I'm saying this because I just want to enter a dialogue with you, because everything you say, I want to follow that, and I think what you said is the path that all of us from all of our different places we need to follow. It's another paradigm that needs to be constructed. And but I agree with Débora that we need to discuss what is the place from which you speak, your position. And I have this desire to construct and to defend the democratic state, and we live in a post-democratic society, and we need to overcome that post-democracy that is being built by a group that wants to destroy and commit genocide and slaughter. And as Jean and Débora, I only had 20 minutes today, but we also wanted to. I mean, we our whole lives are devoted to this. We write books, we write texts, we try and understand these questions, and this comprehension is certainly helps us understand and think about the genocide, the slaughter that happens, and the colonization of Brazil. And because I think that Brazil is among the Latin American countries, it's the country that forgot it is Latin American, and that it committed atrocities against indigenous populations. And so I think we need to recognize the genocide against Black people. What you said about Marielle is perfectly right and true. My husband, he was as a judge, he was threatened with death, several years ago, like this. A car pulled up in front of him. I'm telling this because he also tells this story publicly. The car came up in front of him. A couple of guys came out, the would-be murderers, or the possible murderers, and they pointed guns at him. They laughed, and they left. And he told this when Marielle died, because he said that because he was white, he wasn't murdered. Thank you.
So many questions raised. First, I'd like to thank for your affection. As Márcia said, we've lived so many painful moments, passed through so many violent, that getting somebody's affection feels very good. I've said in many interviews that I've tried to distance myself from Brazilians in certain spaces. And I'm searching for that because I'm broken inside because of violence that was practiced against me. So when somebody comes close to me, I already think they want to offend me, they want to insult me, they want to attack me, because that's what we're subject to in Brazil. So whenever I see that kind of effective demonstration, it touches me. So thank you so much. You've brought so many questions, so many. First, I'd like to thank you so much for the collaboration and for the chance you're giving me reflecting a little bit more. Because this event has given us time to speak. All of us had time to speak. And the panel was put together on top on a common thread, which is the banishment, the exile, with three people that have distinctive stories, but that have that in common. And you've been invited to this event, just like Douglas do Belchior was speaking this event, and it seems like in a general way the event has been concerned about being polyphonic and bringing a lot of voices in. Now today the objective was to discuss this exile experience, and despite that, in all our talks the racial element came in, to use that expression. It was in my talk all the time. So sometimes art can speak more about things than theory or politics. Caetano Veloso, biracial like me, born in Bahia, made a song called Haiti, which is a rap, Haiti, which is a rap. which is an expression of a black culture, pop black culture, which now is world. So Caetano places this on the Jorge Amado house, a white writer that has a complex relationship with the African heritage. So when you see from the Jorge Amado house how black, this is a song, that the rough idea of the song, how black people are treated. I don't define myself as black. I am the son of an interracial marriage between a white woman and a black man. I was born in Lagoas, in the periphery in Bahia. I know that Brazil is not democratic for a long time. We that live in the periphery have always known that Brazil has never been a democracy. It has always been on the brink of becoming a democracy. And us who live in peripheries, we know how state treats us. Inside this collective of people who have been forgotten by the world, we know that people who have black skin are treated differently by the police when they go there. But now it's true that in this and that place, men have a privilege over women. And a gay man is even underneath a woman because the heterosexual mothers kick out their children. I just want to say this because I want to say that I've always worked from an intersectional perspective. I've seen racism against my dad, who was black. I've seen the way that despite my dad being a black man, he was still above my mom, who was a woman, above my sisters, and I was beneath everyone for being gay. So I did a mandate wanting to work from this intersectional perspective and how misery works differently from all of those identities. Now, black trans women are much more vulnerable. We have always seen this. We try to articulate in a broad manner how these things relate. I worked against poverty, knowing that poverty is particularly deadly to black women and black trans women, as the top of a violence, of many violences. So I want to say this because a lot of public talk seem to be superficial, but it's all thought through this. I'm privileged at being talking around today, yes. But water came to my house when I was 12. I was selling cotton candy in the street because my dad was an alcoholic. I starved. I studied in very precarious public schools. I'm a gay man in a homophobic country. I'm saying all of this to say that the apparent privilege is not as that privileged. We fight to have our voice. I think it's wonderful that you're here, and what a wonderful contribution you're going to give. You're in brown just like me, and that's wonderful. And that's a rupture of silence. And it's a conquering of the voice, and it talks with Spivak saying about the subaltern speaking. So today, for instance, before coming here, I went to give a letter to a representative, a gay representative from the state, a congressman, wanting him to sign a letter to pressure the American government, the Brazilian government, sorry, to urge the American government to pressure the Brazilian government in terms of the violence against the Afro-Brazilians populations. So now it's also a very delicate movement for all of our lives in the democratic field. Disagreeing a little bit with Márcia, we all need to articulate on a front against fascism, not talk about socialism and communism. We need to think better about who are our adversaries, where do we need to put our energy. This is a very crucial moment. It's a very pedagogical moment, and it's a moment of love. I've told my feminist friends that use your energy to destroy leftists, that use their energy to destroy leftist men. I ask her, please have a little bit more patience, because our subjectives have been built out of this trash. You know, men have been educated to be like that. Deconstructing ourselves is a constant work. Even for me, a gay man, it has been very, very hard. So instead of attacking ourselves, let's have a little bit more patience. Straight men, both black and white, please. I tell my militant gay friends, please, let's have a little bit more patience with heterosexual men who are homophobic, because they were made out of this homophobia. They've been educated. It's an integral part of them. So this is a moment for a little bit of more love and pedagogy. Just to finish with another element of pop culture, in Game of Thrones, the seven kingdoms have decided to stop their war to fight against the White Walkers, which is a metaphor. No spoilers. I'm saying that the White Walkers are a metaphor against the greater evil, the fascist threat that transforms everyone into a Walking Dead, into a zombie. It represents a threat to the planet, to climate change, and to this nuclear threat. And it's a challenge for us today. And disagreeing a little bit with Márcia talking about this, even capitalists who are not savage capitalists, who are not ultra-liberals, they can be respected. They can be part of this front, this democratic front, in defense of democracy and against fascism. Fascism is dangerous because it produces what it believes it to be, which is an ethnic cleansing that produced the genocide, the Holocaust, but also in apartheid Africa, in Rwanda. There is in this massacre elements of colonialism. Yes, fascism has elements of colonialism. Fascism is this idea of sexual and racial purification, cleanseness. Anyways, I thank you. I thank you a lot for your consideration, and I thank you take into consideration my arguments in order to understand that life's way more complicated, way more complex than what we would like.